What is your call sign? The voice cut through the formation of elite SEAL operators, stopping directly in front of the only woman standing in line, upright, unmoving, not turning her head, as if she had long grown accustomed to every gaze settling on her in ways that were never kind. A beat of silence passed long enough for the entire formation to understand what was coming, and then the next sentence dropped cold and indifferent. Or is it that you're not qualified enough to have a name? A few quiet chuckles followed. No one laughed out loud. No one stepped forward. Just enough sound to turn silence into complicity. The man continued picking apart a minor detail on her uniform, his voice flat as if inspecting an inanimate object. He spoke of regulations of standards of elite units, with no room for exceptions, and every word carried the same message: she did not belong here. The woman did not react. She did not explain. She did not apologize. She did not resist. She remained still, shoulders squared, eyes fixed forward, as if she had learned long ago how to preserve dignity in moments when a person is deliberately rendered invisible. The silence stretched on for a few more seconds, and this time it was no longer a pause between sentences. It became a weight pressing down on the entire formation, heavier than the laughter that had just faded. If you believe that true courage is not found in gunfire, but in the silence of those who have walked through war, subscribe to Veterans Legacy Stories so we can preserve the memory, dignity, and reverence owed to our quiet heroes. Evelyn stepped out of the formation without looking back. No argument, no justification, no gesture that suggested she had just been publicly humiliated in front of dozens of people. Her boots met the ground in a steady rhythm, calm and measured like a habit forged long ago, long enough that her body responded before emotion had time to rise. Her hand slipped into the pocket of her jacket, closing gently around a small object hidden there. Not to draw strength from it, only to remind herself that some things do not need to be seen in order to exist. The familiar pressure of cold metal against her palm slowed her breathing. Evelyn did not look down. She did not need to confirm it was still there. She had carried it through too many places to believe that memory ever truly leaves. A moment from the past flashed through her mind, sharp and sudden like a blade. Night. Rain. A face smeared with mud and blood. A man's hand gripping her wrist in the darkness, shaking desperate. "Don't let go." Just two words forced out between ragged breaths, yet strong enough to compel her to pull his entire body out of a place where no one was supposed to exist. No medals. No witnesses. Only a promise kept at any cost. Evelyn blinked. The memory folded itself away neatly, the way she had always learned to do with anything that might disrupt the present moment. She had learned early on, if you let emotion show, it will be used against you. If you allow pain to surface on your face, it becomes entertainment for someone else. So she chose silence. Not out of weakness, but because silence was the only territory she could fully control. Someone behind her muttered something, half a joke, half a jab, quiet enough not to be called an insult, but clear enough to carry contempt. Evelyn did not turn around. She had heard those words in many places, in many forms. In some places, they called her an exception. In others, an experiment. In some, they did not bother with names at all, only looks that asked why she was even there. Each time she did the same thing, kept her back straight, kept silent, and completed her work better than anyone expected. A young officer watched her walk away, confusion flickering across his face. He could not understand how someone who had just been publicly diminished could leave with such composure. He did not know that for Evelyn, this was not the first time. She had stood in rooms where her name did not exist in any official record. She had listened as decisions about human lives were made in voices as neutral as a weather report. And she had learned how not to let those moments reach the core of who she was. Evelyn paused for a single beat, just long enough to steady her breathing. "Calm," she whispered, not to anyone else, but to herself. It was not encouragement. It was a command. A familiar one. The kind of internal language that had kept her alive in situations where even the smallest deviation could cost someone else their life. She continued walking. Behind her, the silence she left behind was no longer comfortable. It was not the silence of submission. It was a silence without explanation, without resistance, without granting anyone the satisfaction of victory. And that was what began to unsettle those who had laughed quietly, as if they had thrown a stone into a still lake, only to see no ripples at all, nothing to confirm that they had touched the bottom. It was that composure, not any spoken rebuttal, that began to wear down the patience of contemptuous eyes, and quietly opened the path to the public humiliation that would follow in the very next moment. Not all at once, as if each person wanted to contribute only a very small part, so that no one would have to bear responsibility. No one stepped in to stop it. No one told them to quit. The silence of those around became the backdrop for the mockery to continue, turning it into an unspoken ritual, one everyone understood, yet no one acknowledged. Evelyn did not turn back. She had heard those tones before in other places, with different words. They always followed the same pattern: deny, diminish, then wait for a reaction to confirm power. She took another step, and in that precise moment, a shoulder passed just a little too close. Not a collision, just enough for a hand to brush lightly against the pocket of her jacket. Very lightly. But enough. Evelyn froze for a fraction of a second, her hand clenched by instinct. The small object in her pocket pressed harder into her palm. Not pain. Memory. The image surged without warning. A man collapsing onto wet ground, blood spreading quickly through fabric darkening in the rain. Ragged breathing. Eyes wide, not from fear, but from not yet understanding what had just happened. Evelyn dropping to her knees, both hands pressing hard against the wound, hearing her own voice echo in his ears. "Look at me. Don't close your eyes." She remembered the feel of blood sliding between her fingers, remembered the weight of a body growing weaker, and remembered the instant she realized that if she hesitated 1 second longer, that name would disappear from the world forever. The memory withdrew as quickly as it had come. Evelyn straightened. Her shoulders did not shake. Her expression did not change. But inside a boundary had been crossed, not because of words, because of intrusion. The object in her pocket was not jewelry, not a harmless keepsake. It was what remained of a promise paid for in blood. "Hey." Ryland spoke again, this time no longer lowering his voice. "What's with the silence?" Someone else chuckled softly. "Guess she's not used to being put on the spot." The remarks followed one another as if Evelyn's silence had been taken as permission. Evelyn drew in a slow breath. Enough, she said, her voice low, no louder than necessary. Not defiance, not a plea, just a boundary being set. The word caused the laughter to stall for a brief beat, then resume now edged with irritation. No one enjoys it when the target of a joke refuses to play by the rules. A young officer standing at the edge of the circle watched the scene with different eyes. He did not laugh. He looked at the insignia on Evelyn's chest, then at the hand gripping her pocket. There was something in the way she stood and the composure that offered no explanation that unsettled him, as if a story were being missed, as if what was unfolding was not entirely right. But he said nothing. Not yet. Evelyn kept walking, leaving behind laughter that had lost its rhythm eyes beginning to waver, and an atmosphere no longer as light as it had been moments earlier. The humiliation had been cast openly, but it did not produce the victory the mockers had expected. It left only an uneasy void where no one was certain they had done the right thing. And in that void, a quiet gaze began to piece together the scattered fragments, realizing that perhaps the woman walking away carried far more than they had dared to turn into ridicule. A very soft voice broke in from behind, not mocking, but hesitant. "Wait. That is..." The logistics officer stopped mid-sentence, as if he himself did not yet dare believe what he had just noticed. The unfinished remark was not directed at Evelyn, yet it touched the air around them, changing it instantly. The murmuring began to fade. Footsteps grew fewer. A distant radio crackled intermittent enough to remind everyone that this was still a place of order of rank, of things that could not be laughed at forever. A few gazes drifted away from Evelyn, turned toward the speaker, then slowly returned, this time more cautiously, more guarded. Admiral Hale sensed the shift almost immediately. He disliked moments when control slipped from his grasp, even in silence. He stepped forward a fraction, his voice firmer, harder. "Commander Cross," he said, no longer masking the coldness. "I asked you a very simple question." He paused, drawing all attention back to himself. "Do you understand your position here?" Evelyn met his eyes directly. No challenge, no evasion. Her gaze did not ask permission, nor did it bow. Hale continued, his voice steady and sharp as a metal edge. "Elite units exist because of discipline, because of compliance, and because people know where they belong." Each sentence stacked upon the last bricks laid carefully to build a single conclusion: she was in the wrong place. No one laughed anymore. Not because they had suddenly begun to respect Evelyn, but because they were starting to feel the weight of the moment. When an admiral used that tone, it was not to correct, it was to brand. Hale did not merely want to end the joke. He wanted to finish Evelyn's dignity right there in front of everyone using the language of authority. "Do you have anything you'd like to explain?" he asked, his voice lowered but not softened. It was not an invitation. It was the familiar trap speak and be cut off, stay silent and be judged as guilty. A few young officers watched Evelyn waiting. Some hoped she would react so the mockery could continue. Others hoped she would speak so it would all end more quickly. Evelyn remained silent. Not because she lacked an answer, but because she knew that in moments like these, words only mattered when someone was willing to listen. She held her posture. Her shoulders did not drop. Her eyes did not leave Hale. There was no provocation, only a complete unspoken presence like an affirmation that required no sound. Hale's mouth tightened. He took her silence as defiance. "Silence does not replace capability," he said. "And capability here is not measured by vague abstractions." His eyes flicked briefly to Evelyn's chest, where the insignia rested, then lifted again, as if he had just presented final proof. "We require clarity." At the edge of the crowd, the logistics officer said nothing further, but his gaze had changed. He looked at Hale, then at Evelyn, then back at the insignia he had almost named aloud moments earlier. Somewhere in his mind, a piece was locking into place, not enough to conclude, but enough to doubt. Another man older straightened instinctively as Hale's voice escalated. He did not intervene. Not yet. But the shift in his stance revealed that he had moved from observation to evaluation. Power still rested with Hale, but it was no longer absolute, at least no longer invisible. Evelyn sensed it, not through eye contact, but through experience. The moments before a storm always carried the same scent, tight, dry, filled with unfinished sentences. She still did not speak. She did not need to defend herself. Not now. Hale ended with a short, precise line, stamping it into the air. "We will resolve this." Not a promise, a warning. Yet when he finished speaking, the space did not return to what it had been. The humiliation had been pushed to its peak. And at the same time, something else had happened. Power had begun to be seen examined. And because of that, it no longer moved as freely as before. And in that exact moment, before the words of humiliation could harden into judgment, the truth quietly slipped from his grasp, preparing to step into the place where it would finally be called by name. A voice rose from behind, not loud, not rushed, but strong enough to cut through the tension that was building. No introductions were made. No names were called. There was only a presence that caused everyone standing there to adjust their posture instinctively. Rear Admiral Naomi Ward stepped forward, her gaze sweeping quickly across the space before settling on Evelyn. She did not speak right away. A brief beat passed. Then she took half a step forward and placed herself in a position that was unmistakable and deliberate between Evelyn and Hale. No display, no challenge. Just a small gesture, yet enough to alter the invisible order that had just been established. "It's an honor to meet you, Commander." Ward's voice was calm and precise, carrying no hint of hesitation. This was not a courtesy. It was a confirmation. Evelyn turned toward her. She gave a slight nod. "Admiral?" 2 words. Exactly enough. No more. No less. To those watching, that brief exchange conveyed more information than any speech could have. The crowd reacted before it had time to think. Spines straightened. Feet adjusted their positions by reflexes drilled over years of training. There were no orders, no commands. Only military instinct recognizing that a higher rank had entered, and at the same moment recognizing that the old order had just been replaced. Hale remained still. He neither stepped back nor moved forward. His eyes wavered for a split second, just long enough for the perceptive to catch the uncertainty. He looked at Ward, then at Evelyn, then at the crowd that was no longer waiting for him to lead. The authority was still there, but it was no longer exclusive. "We are addressing a matter of discipline," Hale said, his voice striving to maintain control. The words followed protocol, but lacked their usual force. Ward turned to him, her expression composed. "I've heard," she replied, "and I believe there are matters that cannot be resolved by diminishing others in public." No one laughed. No one whispered. The atmosphere tightened into order, as if everyone had been returned to their proper place. Evelyn stood there without adding a word. She did not need to defend herself. Ward's presence had already done so in a way no one could challenge without exposing their own motives. A young officer glanced at Evelyn, then quickly looked away. His gaze no longer carried the curiosity it had moments earlier. It held consideration instead. Something had shifted into alignment in his mind. Not the full truth, but the right direction. Ward inclined her head slightly toward Evelyn. "We'll speak later," she said quietly, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "Not a promise. An assumption." Evelyn nodded again. Her composure remained intact, but something subtle changed in her eyes. Not relief, but the recognition that at least in this moment her dignity had been seen. Hale cleared his throat. "If there's nothing further," he began, then stopped when he realized no one was waiting for his conclusion. Ward turned to the crowd. "Everyone," she said, clearly. "Resume your duties. 3 words. Enough to disperse the tension and establish a new order." The crowd began to break apart one by one, each person carrying their own thoughts. There was no more laughter, no more mockery. Only quick, discreet glances cast back toward Evelyn, not out of curiosity, but reassessment. Hale lingered for another beat, then turned away. He said nothing more. Yet the uncertainty had not left his face. He had not lost an argument. He had lost control at a moment far more significant. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She had not defeated anyone. She had simply stood where she belonged and waited for the truth to find its own path forward. Ward walked alongside her for a few steps, then stopped. "You chose silence at exactly the right moment," she said. Evelyn replied evenly, "I learned that a long time ago. No further explanation was needed. No return to the past." Recognition did not arrive through loud praise. It came through position, through where people stood when the storm rose, and through who was called by the right name at the right time. And as silence gave way to authoritative presence, Evelyn's true identity began to draw closer to the moment it would be spoken, not through shouting, but through a truth that could no longer be denied. Commander Cross Hale spoke this time, no longer concealing his intent. "Before this entire assembly, I require you to answer." He paused briefly, long enough to draw every gaze toward Evelyn. "What is your call sign?" A compressed stillness fell. Not the silence of hesitation, but the moment just before the inevitable arrives. Evelyn lifted her head. The motion was slow and steady, unhurried, unchallenging. She looked directly at Hale, her voice calm as if stating a fact long recorded. "Raven Queen, sir." The 2 words landed clean and heavy. No explanation, no attachment. They stood on their own weight. Some in the hall frowned, not yet understanding. Others froze as if they had just heard something that was never meant to exist in ordinary life. "That's impossible," Hale blurted almost by reflex. He stepped back half a pace, his hand slipping from the ceremonial object he was holding. It fell, striking the dry floor with a short, sharp sound, enough to cut through every assumption. The color drained from his face. "That is a top-secret designation." He continued, his voice dropping. "You can't," Ward spoke clearly without raising her voice. "Admiral Hale, Raven Queen is the call sign of a classified extraction asset." She scanned the hall, then turned back to Evelyn. 7 years ago, Ward continued placing each word with care. A mission that was not permitted to fail. A man in the front row stood abruptly. Then a second. A third. No one spoke at first. They stared at Evelyn, really looked like men matching a memory to the figure before them. "It was you," a hoarse voice finally said. "It was you." The man swallowed hard. "The rainy night. The mountainside. You said, 'Don't let go.'" Evelyn did not reply. She didn't need to. Those words were not for her to confirm. They were recognition, natural and unforced, from those who had been pulled back from a place without return. "You carried me nearly 3 miles, another man said, his voice trembling slightly. "I never saw your face. I only remember your voice." He looked down at his hands. "I'm still alive." Hale turned to Ward, grasping for footing. "If that's true," he said, "then why her file?" Ward cut in, neither sharp nor gentle. "Because that file is sealed at a clearance level not everyone is authorized to access." She paused. "Even those who believe they are." The murmur did not erupt. It dissolved into deeper breaths, brief exchanged looks, spines straightening a little more than before. Raven Queen was no longer just a name. It became a marker, an answer to the questions that had simmered since the beginning. 7 years ago, Ward continued, 6 people were brought home. No medals, no public reports, only one commitment, silence to preserve the truth. She turned to Evelyn. Commander Cross kept that commitment. Hale opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Evelyn, then at the people standing around him. He realized he had forced the truth into the open before it could be shielded. Power does not vanish with a single blow. It fractures when truth no longer needs permission. Evelyn spoke again, her first words, since her answer, her voice still even. Admiral, she said, addressing not Hale, but the shared space itself. I did not come here to be named. A beat. I came to complete a mission. She paused. The mission is complete. There was no applause, no cheers, only those who had stood still out of protocol, now standing still out of respect. Ward gave a slight nod. Hale bent down to retrieve the ceremonial object, his hand no longer as steady as before. The truth had returned to its rightful place. No noise, no negotiation. It stood upright, met every gaze, and spoke its own name. And when the truth has chosen the right person to appear, through what remains is a single question. Will people face it, with bowed heads or with honor? Hale remained still for another beat, then bowed his head. Not a bow of protocol, not one forced upon him. It was the bow of a man who understood that power had just left his hands, without anyone needing to seize it. He spoke, his voice low and dry. Commander Cross, I was wrong. A pause. I used authority to conceal my own insecurity. He lifted his head, his eyes no longer searching for submission. I will accept full responsibility. No one applauded. No one reacted. This time the silence was not heavy. It was clean. It closed a chapter. Ward did not intervene. She allowed the words to stand on their own merit, no reinforcement, no interpretation. Evelyn looked at Hale and gave a very slight nod. Not acceptance. Not rejection. Simply acknowledgement. A young officer stepped out of the line. His movement was awkward, as if this were the first time he had ever chosen for himself in front of a crowd. Commander, he said, his voice tight. I laughed. He swallowed hard. Not because I believed it was right, but because I was afraid of being different from the group. He bowed his head. I'm sorry. Evelyn turned toward him. Her gaze did not probe or weigh. It went straight through. You didn't know, she said. A beat. Now you do, another beat. That's enough. No advice, no lecture, no conditions attached. The sentence ended exactly where it needed to end. The young officer straightened as if something lost had just been returned to its center. He nodded. Yes, Commander. He stepped back without needing instruction. Something had been learned without notes, without ceremony. Another voice rose from behind. We saw it. The words were not directed at Evelyn, but at the shared space itself. Not today. A pause. But in the way you stood still. No one asked, stood still for what? Everyone understood. Hale took half a step forward, then stopped. If there's anything I can do, he left the sentence unfinished. Evelyn shook her head slightly. There's no need, she replied. Honor doesn't require compensation through gestures. A pause. It needs to be kept correctly. Ward looked at Evelyn, then at the crowd. The lesson here isn't about who was right, she said. It's about knowing when to remain silent and when to stand in the right place. She turned to Hale, and about who must be held accountable when power strays from its purpose. No one objected. No one debated. Those present understood that in this moment, argument would thin the meaning that had just taken shape. Forgiveness was not demanded. It was given at the right time, in the right measure. Evelyn did not remain at the center of the circle. She shifted aside by a single step, allowing others to close the story in their own way. She did not claim credit. She did not accept praise. She did not collect bowed heads. She kept something more important, the integrity of a silence that had fulfilled its duty. One of the men who had once been rescued stepped forward, placing a hand over his chest. We owe you our lives, he said. Evelyn shook her head. No, she replied. You owe each other. The answer was short, decisive. It returned life to where it truly belonged, to comrades. Hale stepped back into the line. No longer the center. No longer the target. Just a man who had learned a lesson too late. Ward gave Evelyn a slight nod, not praise, but agreement between those who understand that legacy does not lie in who gets remembered by name. Evelyn took one last look around. She did not search for recognition. She searched for calm. And when she found it small, real, she turned away. Because true honor does not require others to kneel, it only needs to be placed correctly, and then it stands on its own. The investigation unfolded quietly. No loud press releases, no public accusations. Hale's name gradually disappeared from meetings, from assignment lists, from places where it had once appeared without question. He exited the system the way much power has existed before, without noise, without justification, without farewell. Only an empty space remained where authority had stood for too long. A document was issued afterward, brief, precise, bearing no personal names. The line at the top read, "Verify before judging." No further explanation followed. None was needed. Those who had witnessed the moment understood that these words were not born of theory, but of a wound deep enough to force the system to correct itself. In a hallway, a young female officer paused as Evelyn passed by. She did not snap to attention. She did not raise a hand in formal salute. She simply looked directly at her, held the gaze for one extra beat, then nodded. The nod asked nothing and pleaded for nothing. It carried the clear-eyed respect of someone who had learned to see others in full context, not through first impressions. Evelyn returned the gesture with an even smaller nod. No words. No pause. She kept walking. No one called her name. No one held her back. The attention of the crowd was no longer necessary. It had already served its purpose. Some spoke quietly among themselves, not about heroics, not about records. They spoke about how she stood still when pushed to the edge, about how she spoke exactly one sentence at exactly the right moment, about how she left when everything was finally bright enough. These stories had no climax, but they spread steadily the way true things often do. Another officer, younger still, stopped before a file cabinet. She read the new regulation, ran her fingers along the edge of the page, then exhaled slowly. She did not know who Evelyn was. She did not need to. What stayed with her was the reassurance that if one day she stood alone, the truth would still have a way forward. Evelyn did not become the center of any ceremony afterward. No interviews, no speeches, no requests for recognition. She returned to the familiar rhythm of someone who completes a mission and steps away from the light. No one asked her to retell it. No one demanded further proof. The Raven Queen symbol appeared one final time quietly. No large insignia, no display. Just a small mark enough for those who knew to know. It was not meant to draw attention. It existed to remind that some things are done correctly even when no one is watching. Someone later asked Ward, "Will this story change anything?" She answered simply, "It already has. Not through the fall of one individual, but through giving those who came after a firmer place to stand when needed." On another morning, Evelyn stood at the edge of the training ground. She watched new faces, uncertain steps, eyes caught between eagerness and caution. She did not speak about herself. She spoke about standards, about responsibility, about remaining silent when silence is right, and speaking when the truth must be named. Someone asked softly, "Commander, how do you know when to stand up?" Evelyn considered for a beat. "When you see someone about to be stripped of their worth," she said, "and you know you can stop it." The answer was not inspirational. It was practical. The day moved on. The system continued to operate, but somewhere in smaller decisions and closer looks and questions asked. Sooner, a legacy began to live in its quietest form. Legacy is not rank that makes others bow. Legacy is how we teach those who come after us to lift their heads at the right moment. Veterans' legacy stories. We remember the quiet heroes. If this story has led you to look at a woman with deeper respect, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to Veterans' Legacy Stories so that women veterans are never forgotten.